How is the competition in the AFC East shaping up for 2025? We're checking in on the Dolphins, Patriots, and Jets today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Well, folks, welcome in. I've had a few requests lately for me to do an episode breaking down the AFC East, and that's what we're going to do today, checking in on the Bills' rivals in the division ahead of the 2025 NFL Draft. And I want to look at the draft capital for each team, what these teams need, and what the key dynamics are for each situation as we talk about this Bills team going for a sixth consecutive AFC East title. The Bills have done a good job with this division. But for as much as the Bills would like to win it for a sixth time in a row, the Dolphins, the Jets, and the Patriots would very much not like that to happen. And look, I know there's a lot of concern for teams like the Ravens and the Chiefs, and certainly the Bills are going to have to beat one or both of them to get to the Super Bowl. But your best path, your best ticket for a Super Bowl run is by taking care of your division. And so we are going to be mindful of that and have a focused conversation today on the AFC East. Let's do it. Let's start with the Miami Dolphins coming off of an 8-9 season, which placed them second in the division in 2024. They enter this draft with a pretty good amount of draft capital. They own pick 13 in the first round, 48, 98, 116, 135, 150. That's a healthy amount of top 150 draft picks. They also have 155, 224, 231, and 253. So a huge opportunity for Miami to add young talent to their roster. And they're kind of coming out of several years in a row where they haven't had as much draft capital. And this is a big opportunity for them to infuse this roster with cost control players that can help provide starters and, of course, depth in some key areas as well. Now, I do think Miami has a handful of very important needs to address in this draft, or, really between now and when the season starts. And I would start that conversation on the defensive side of the football, particularly at defensive tackle, where they have Zach Sealer, who's a heck of a football player, but not a whole lot else around him. Benito Jones, Matt Dickerson, Neil Farrell, those are rotational players at best. They don't have any other real answers at defensive tackle. Of course, Calais Campbell was important for them. He's back with the Arizona Cardinals. Christian Wilkins left a few years ago, and it's Zach Sealer and not a whole lot else. I think they've got to come out of this draft or come out of this remaining offseason with not just a running mate for Zach Sealer, but several other players that are going to get meaningful playing time for that defense. I also think cornerback is a big need for the Miami Dolphins. And there's some rumblings out there about Jalen Ramsey and, is he going to get traded? That feels like it's a possibility. But even if Jalen Ramsey is back, they need some help here at corner, where they've moved on from Kendall Fuller. And right now it's Kader Kohou, Jalen Ramsey, who's looking like he might get traded, and Storm Duck, Cam Smith, a second-round pick from 2023 that I liked a lot coming out of South Carolina, hasn't played well and has been injured. He's just not been on a good path to this point. And, boy, if they move on from Jalen Ramsey, they are even more in need of an answer at corner. And so Kohou's probably best in the slot. And if Jalen Ramsey moves on, they need 2 starting caliber players on the outside. I'd also look at safety, and they added some players in free agency in Ashton Davis and Ifeatu Melifonwu. I think those are very upgradable players. Certainly, they come in and provide athleticism and depth, but Ashton Davis, as a former fairly high pick of the Jets, never really got an opportunity to stick at safety, special teams player, but it couldn't even beat out a guy like Tony Adams, who was a undrafted free agent who winds up being a pretty good starter for them. And Ife Melifonwu was super toolsy and a player I like, but he's been never available for the Detroit Lions and signs a really modest deal to come over to Miami in free agency. Now, if he can stay healthy, I think he can be a nice player for them, but that's really never been something he's been able to do. And so, even if Ifeatu Melifonwu is healthy and an answer, Ashton Davis doesn't give me the warm fuzzies as his running mate. So that stands out to me as a need as well. So on defense, D-tackle, corner, and safety, I think are primary areas that they need to address. Now, they have some good things going on defense. I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but defensively, in terms of needs, that's a lot to get done. On the offensive side of the football, I think their offensive line is probably not in as bad of shape as some people want to think it is. They drafted Patrick Paul in the second round last year to be the successor for Teron Armstead, who is retired. So he's going to step in at left tackle. Then they're going to get Austin Jackson back at right tackle, who was injured last season, and he's a good starter for them. They have Aaron Brewer at center, who I think was a heck of a free agent addition, especially for that Mike McDaniel scheme where he's able to really get out in space and use his range and athleticism. And then it's just about the guards where, they bring back Liam Eichenberg, who's experienced in the system. He's been an underperformer for sure as a former second-round pick, but is at least experienced. They signed James Daniels, kind of a big-ticket free agent. He's coming off of a significant injury. If he's healthy and ready to go, I think he's a great fit, but obviously coming off injury is something to be concerned about. And then they also signed Larry Borum, who's been in and out of the lineup for the Bears. That's played tackle. I think he could project inside at guard. Point being that Liam Eichenberg / Larry Borum spot is definitely an area that they can upgrade. And, I think they should. I think they should try to get better there, where they've tried to get by when it comes to their interior offensive linemen, and I'm not sure that's really worked for them. And so I think it would behoove them to get an upgrade at that spot between Patrick Paul at left tackle and Aaron Brewer at center. I'd also shout out wide receiver, where things just continue to look dicey with Tyreek Hill. Really throughout the entire season last year, things were dicey with him. And he kind of quits on the team at the end of the season. You're talking about a team that's questioned for their toughness and commitment from veteran players, and Tyreek Hill goes out and does what he does at the end of the season. That can't sit well with anybody. Then, of course, a long list of domestic issues. Another one just recently popped up. I mean, it feels like they'd probably love to move on, and so it hasn't happened yet. But the end's got to be somewhat near for Tyreek Hill. If it's not this offseason, I can't imagine him sticking along for much longer in Miami, which to me creates a need at wide receiver, where Jalen Waddle, of course, is a good player, but they need other guys besides Jalen Waddle. And I think Nick Westbrook-Ikine comes in and gives them some size and blocking ability, but not really a volume player for the offense. And so I do think that wide receiver is something that they should be thinking about getting addressed. So D-tackle, corner, safety, guard, and wide receiver stand out to me as needs for Miami. Now, getting into their key dynamics, I mean, this is a make or break year for Mike McDaniel, the head coach. And they've certainly had some level of success. They made the playoffs his first 2 years. Then they had even more injuries last year, particularly Tua at quarterback, and that derailed their season last year. And they wind up finishing 8-9. But I think there's a lot of concerns about Mike's own growth that's necessary as a play caller, as a leader, as somebody who's had some unique personnel thoughts that I think has hindered their success. And, I think it's a make or break year for him. And I mean, the ownership put out a statement at the end of the season kind of signaling that. And I think in this make or break year, this is a situation where he's going to have to coach above his talent. I don't think this roster is as good or will be as good as it was the last 2 or 3 years. And so if it's going to work with Mike McDaniel, he's going to have to coach above his talent. And that's a big ask. We'll find out if he can do it. Offensively, of course, nothing more important than Tua Tagovailoa and his health. They're a markedly better team when that guy's available. You can say whatever you want about Tua, but this team is clearly at its best when he's available to them, and that's not always been consistent in terms of his availability. I think they got to evolve their run scheme, where probably some more inside runs. They want to attack the edges, but they haven't had the blocking to attack the edges. And so, can they get more inside run going with Jalen Wright, a player they invested a decent amount in last year's draft to have? Of course, Devon Achane is a multifaceted weapon, but I don't know that he's a high-volume player in terms of carries. How do you round out that backfield, especially now with Raheem Mostert no longer in the mix? I think there's some interesting conversations about this offense. As for the general manager, Chris Grier, there's some thoughts that this could be it for him in terms of getting this team through the draft. There's rumblings out there that the team could move on after the draft. Maybe he could resign, retire, take a different role. I'm curious to see what the outlook is there. Defensively, I think very highly of their coordinator, Anthony Weaver. I thought he got a lot out of that unit last year that was banged up, expired with some aging players in some areas. And I thought he got a pretty good performance out of that group. And, we talk about their defensive tackle situation with Zach Sealer, but their edge rusher situation could be really good. I mean, Chop Robinson looks like a hit as a first-round pick last year off the edge. And then, that duo of Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips basically missed all of last year after they were injured in 2023. They should be pretty close to healthy and ready to go. And that could be a big identity piece of their defense, is that edge rusher situation. And then I also will shout out their linebacker room, which I think has come a long way. Jordan Brooks looked good for them last year. They signed Tyrell Dotson late, who I think gives them their downhill player. And then Willie Gay is a nice complementary piece to both Brooks and Dotson. If they want to play base, if they want to play matchups, he can come in and play in space. He's a very good quarterback spy player that can kind of round out what they got going on the second level. So big year for Miami. If they don't get it done, I'm sure they're going to move on from Mike McDaniel. And if Mike McDaniel is going to get it done, he's going to have to improve. He's going to have to evolve. And ultimately, he's going to have to coach above the talent on the roster. All right, folks, we're getting into the New York Jets, or the New Jersey Jets, here on the other side of it. Folks, please be sure to stick with me. Have you ever checked your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just another budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. The insights are surprising, folks. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. The convenience is excellent. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Plus, it's easy to collaborate. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, let's talk about the Jets. They finished in third in this division last year with a 5-12 record. Of course, they fired Robert Saleh, a few games into the season. Jeff Ulbrich takes over as the interim, and now they have a new general manager. They fired Joe Douglas. They have a new head coach. And so the head coach is Aaron Glenn, coming over from the Detroit Lions. He was their defensive coordinator. Now he's the Jets head coach, of course, former player with the Jets. And he hired Steve Wilks to be the defensive coordinator, which is fascinating to me because I couldn't think of two stylistically more different people in terms of defensive ideology than Aaron Glenn, who's man coverage, blitz, base defense, and then Steve Wilks, who's more zone-oriented, and he comes over to run that defense. Their general manager now is Darren Moughey, who was with the Denver Broncos for a long, long time. He comes over as the GM for the Jets. The Jets have some high picks. They pick 7th in the first round, 42, 73, 110, 145, 162, 186, and 207. So they've got some nice draft capital, including a top 10 pick and another one in the top 53 in the top 75. So they're sitting in pretty good shape there. They do have some needs to address. I think starting with really just a bunch of stuff on the offensive side of the football. I'll go ahead and say it. Justin Fields signed to be their starting quarterback. It's not a firm, huge commitment, but it's a decent commitment, a 2-year deal that gives them, I think, a runway to find an answer. I think Justin Fields is at least interesting to me. Size, athleticism, he's got a big arm. Hasn't been a very stable passer, but he certainly has his moments. He's a player I liked a lot coming out of Ohio State, and I don't think the Bears really put him in a great position to be successful, and he only got a few starts with the Steelers. I thought he was okay. The team looked okay to me. And so we'll see. This is obviously a big opportunity, a big crossroads in Justin Fields' career to really determine, like, are you going to be a dude, the guy that was a toolsy first-round pick, or are you going to be this, flashy backup that never is a guy that anybody wants to be the preferred starter? I think we're going to find out for Justin Fields, but I do think they got to build some stuff up around him on this offense, in particular an offensive tackle. Olu Fashanu, their first-round pick last year, I think he'll provide an answer at one tackle spot, but the other one, not so much. I think we got to get that figured out. They got Carter Warren, who I don't think is an NFL starter, and Chuks Okorafor, who I think is really the last several years has proven he's not a reliable answer. So I think they've got to get a starting tackle for sure. And then we need some weapons. I don't think they have a meaningful passing game weapon outside of Garrett Wilson. They just don't, not my opinion. I don't think much of Allen Lazard. I think Josh Reynolds as your fourth receiver is okay. Jeremy Ruckert's an okay backup tight end. We need some players. We need some playmakers here at receiver and tight end to give Justin Fields an opportunity to go out there and be productive. And so they need a tackle, and I think they need at least two passing game weapons here that can come in and provide answers for this offense. So that's what I think about this team offensively. On the defensive side of the football, I think they're in a lot better shape. But I do look at defensive tackle and have a lot of concerns, just like I did last year. I thought that was probably, outside of Aaron Rodgers and all that circus stuff, they weren't very stout in the middle of that defensive line. And Quinnen Williams just didn't have a running mate. And I don't think he does now. And they gave money to Derek Nottie to come over. They really didn't give him money. They signed him. And he's really kind of phased out in Kansas City. I think he's kind of an expired player at this point. And they need a running mate for Quinnen Williams. They need a one-tech in a big way. And so I'm curious to see how they address that. I think the rest of the defense is in pretty good shape on the edge, second level. They got some interesting secondary dynamics, but I think for the most part, their defense is in pretty decent shape. So we need a tackle on offense. We need two playmakers in the passing game. We need some help for this defensive line in terms of a defensive tackle to play next to Quinnen Williams. So just looking at the key dynamics for the Jets, obviously the regime change is notable with new head coach, new general manager. And I think this one's pretty significant because of how much the Jets have failed, to be honest, really over the last decade, where it's just inevitable. Whenever there's a new GM and a new head coach, they want their guys. They want their guys. And I see a huge appetite. There should be a huge appetite to not be overly committed to anybody that was on this roster prior to Moughey and Glenn taking over. And so I'm expecting a lot of transition ahead for this roster as they try to, of course, set a foundation, but also build a team that's built for sustained success. So I think the regime change here is huge. Obviously, we talked about Justin Fields at quarterback. Certainly, they got to get better around him. And I think this is, like I said, a crossroads for Justin Fields where it's time to do it or don't. And boy, if you can do it with the Jets, be huge, right? Big opportunity for him in his career. He's very talented, but he's a high variance player. Can he stabilize his play and be an answer? He's certainly talented. We'll find out. I'm curious with this Brandon Stevens signing, former Baltimore Raven, who was, probably one of the most hated starters by a fan base I've ever seen. Ravens fans do not like Brandon Stevens, and that's for good reason. He gives up a ton of plays. Well, the Jets love him. They gave him like a big contract to come over and be the guy opposite of Sauce Gardner. And Aaron Glenn cares about those corners. So I'm kind of curious to see what they saw in him and, what the plan is. Obviously, with what they paid him, it's to start and be a meaningful piece of this defense for years to come. But I'm not sure what they watch with Baltimore that's going to enable him to meet the expectations that come with the big free agent contract. So I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out, but at least they're telling us through their actions that they believe he can be an answer for them at corner. I think a big part of this team, this Jets team, in addition to things that I've discussed, is that they're developing young talent on defense has to keep on their trajectory. Guys like Will McDonald, who took a big step forward as a former first-round pick on the edge last year. Jermaine Johnson was on a great path, then he got hurt last year. He needs to come back and get back on track. Jamian Sherwood looked great for them at linebacker. You want to kind of continue his ascension as the running mate next to Quincy Williams. And so you got some nice pillars here in Quinnen Williams and Quincy Williams at linebacker, Sauce Gardner at corner. I know that everybody likes to clown on Sauce Gardner and say he's overrated. Like, maybe that's true, but he's still a really good starting corner in the NFL. So they've got some nice foundational pieces, but they got to stay at that level with a new scheme and a new head coach, and that this young developing talent needs to stay on their trajectory, and then, hey, sprinkle some things in around them to really round it out. I think the Jets are on a decent path. It's going to come down to, really Justin Fields, right? Can Justin Fields be the guy? And if not, I think that's okay because there's not a huge commitment. But if he's not your answer, like, what are you going to do? What type of appetite do they have for a quarterback in this draft? They're picking 7. Do they like a Shedeur Sanders if he falls? Do they like Jackson Dart? Do they like Jalen Milroe? Are they kind of see what happens next year? Obviously, more than anything, they've got to figure out quarterback. And I think they got a great head coach hire in Aaron Glenn. I believe in him in terms of leadership. And, I think there should be a level of an excitement for Aaron Glenn and his arrival. But, the Jets have kind of been at the bottom of this division for a long time. They haven't been competitive in a long time. There's been a lot of hype. They've disappointed time and time again. And so I'm kind of curious to see how they move things forward and try to really build something that's sustainable. And obviously, I think they got a good coach. They've got some young foundational players. Can they get the quarterback piece right? We'll find out. All right, coming up on the other side of it, it's the New England Patriots. Mike Vrabel back in time, this time as the head coach. We'll break that down for you. Folks, be sure to stick with me. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place a $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet on your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Buffalo businesses, it's time to register for the JP Morgan Corporate Challenge. This year's event is on Thursday, June 12th, and features a 3.5-mile course through Delaware Park, followed by a celebration with a DJ, lawn games, and a tented experience for you and your teammates. Walkers, joggers, and runners are all welcome. Whether you run for the love of it, for your company, or to build lasting bonds, this is your moment. Teams of 4 participants or more can register today. Registration closes on Tuesday, May 13th. 1 part run, 1 part party. The Corporate Challenge has earned its reputation as Buffalo's corporate social event of the year. Join us for great competition, teamwork, company pride, and a true sense of accomplishment. Go to www.jpmorganchasecc.com and choose Buffalo as your location to start your registration today. We'll see you on the course. All right, let's talk about the New England Patriots here. They finished last in the division last year. 4-13 was their record. They're one and done with Drake Maye at head coach. They've brought Mike Vrabel in to be their head coach, probably the marquee coaching hire of any team, right? A guy that had a level of success in Tennessee, despite never really having stable quarterback play with Ryan Tannehill. I thought he had a bad GM and John Robinson. And Mike Vrabel's the type of guy that can come in and build culture, and they're gonna have a good defense. They're gonna win in the margins, right? They're gonna play good situational ball. He's a good head coach. And he takes over this New England team that had a lot of questions, right? A lot of questions on the roster. But they also had a lot of resources, a ton of cap space to spend, and they got a lot of draft capital as well. In fact, they own pick 4, 38, 69, 77, 106, 144, 171, 220, and 238. That's a healthy chunk of draft capital. And if the Patriots, or if it plays out for the Patriots well, and 2 quarterbacks go before they pick at 4, they're going to get Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter. And that's got to be a dream situation after they foolishly won in week 18 against the Bills, right? They had the number 1 pick in the draft. And so not only could they have sat there at number 1 and picked Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, but we know that the Titans, the Browns, and the Giants all wanted Cam Ward. And so they would have been in a position to trade out of 1 with all those teams bidding against each other, get all the capital in the world to move back, and still get Carter or Hunter. They'd come out smelling like a rose if they wind up organically picking at 4 and getting Carter or Hunter. So if you don't want that to happen, you need to root for the Giants and the Browns to draft those players and not pick a quarterback at 2 and 3. So what do the Patriots need? Well, I think they have a huge need at offensive tackle. Huge. Where they did a good job of signing Morgan Moses, who comes in and I think can handle the right tackle job. And Morgan Moses is not only a sufficient level starter, but he's a big locker room guy, a leader. They need those types of guys, but they still need a left tackle. We can't go to war with Caden Wallace and Verdarian Lowe as our options at left tackle. So if they don't get Carter or Hunter at 4, I would have to think a left tackle, maybe Armand Membu from Missouri or Will Campbell out of LSU would be in play for them at number 4, but they need to get a left tackle. That's got to be very important for them. I still think they need a wide receiver. You know, they signed Stephon Diggs, and we'll see there, right? I mean, before the injury, Stephon Diggs, his last season in Buffalo, like the vertical components of Stephon Diggs' game really fell off. And then you go to Houston and, you know, his average depth of target is under 9 yards, like no vertical elements to his game, kind of an underneath player, which I think is still how Diggs can help a team. But now he's going to turn 32 this year, and he tore his ACL last year. I know he's got workout videos, right? He always does. So do a lot of players. We'll see what happens, right? I mean, the idea of Stephon Diggs makes a lot of sense for them, but what can they count on from him? I think there's it's a very interesting dynamic. I understand the swing. They had all the cap space in the world. They needed to spend it. They needed a receiver. We'll see what Diggs can give him at this age coming off of an ACL. So I still think they need receiver. If Stephon Diggs was in his prime, I'd still think they need a receiver. What do they have outside of him? Pop Douglas in the slot, okay. Kayshon Boutte, limited player. Mac Hollins, good 4th or 5th receiver. They have all these players they recently drafted, like Jalen Polk, Javon Baker. Those guys didn't prove much as rookies or really anything as rookies. Kendrick Bourne, another limited player. You know, they need some real answers here for their young quarterback and Drake Maye, who looks really good. So we need an offensive tackle. We need more at receiver. And I think defensively, they spent a ton on their defense. They had a bunch of money, and they really elevated the group, the talent of that defense. I still think they need some help on the edge. I'm not a big Harold Landry guy, so he's one of their edge rushers. And then what else? What else do they have off the edge? I don't think much. They got some good penetration-style defensive linemen in Milton Williams and Christian Barmore, Keon White, but I think we need another true edge guy in to play opposite of Harold Landry, and I wouldn't be overly committed to Harold Landry. I think he's been rough since that ACL tear. So what are the key dynamics with New England? Well, they were big spenders in free agency. They spent a ton of money, and they had to, right? And they had to pay a bad team tax. They had to overspend for talent. We know all about this, right? That's where New England's at. So they overspent for a lot of guys, but they had a bunch of money, and they needed to do it. So, like, you can certainly, on one hand, make your jokes and whatever that they overspent for players, but they had all the money in the world, and they literally had to. They needed to do something to elevate the floor of this roster. And they did. And I think they got better. Did they overspend? Yeah, they overspent, but they got better. Carlton Davis, Robert Spillane is actually one of my favorite players they added at linebacker. Harold Landry, Caleb Chason, Marcus Epps, Milton Williams, Morgan Moses, Garrett Bradbury at center, Diggs. I think they did some good things with those players. I think their defense should be really good. Obviously, I think highly of Mike Vrabel. I think they have good talent at all 3 levels. And I think kind of the wild card for their defense, and I hope it works out, but Christian Barmore, good-looking young player, had some health issues last year with blood clots where, he was delayed to start, comes back, and then, gets shut down again. Hopefully everything's good to go there. He's a dynamic young player, and I think their defense with him is pretty freaking good. They have really good secondary talent. This corner duo of Christian Gonzalez and Carlton Davis has a ton of upside. I think Kyle Duggar will be a lot better this year. Jabril Peppers at safety. That's a really good secondary, not to mention Marcus Jones in the slot. Alex Austin's a good depth piece. I think they got a lot of good things happening on the defensive side of the football. And, of course, Drake Maye. I mean, Drake Maye was a top 3 pick last year. I was really impressed with him, and not only did he play well, but when you consider the circumstances, like an embarrassingly bad offensive line, no weapons, defense was not good. For Drake Maye to go out there and show the poise and make the plays that he did and show the flashes, looking pretty good. Looking pretty good. If I was a Patriots fan, I'd be real excited about Drake Maye. And so we'll see how they take that next step. Obviously, new coaching. Josh McDaniels now the OC. Got to get another receiver. Got to get some more offensive line help. Really kind of build this out moving forward. But I think anybody that watched Drake Maye last year has to be impressed to some level. I certainly was. So there you have it, folks. That's the AFC East. We'll find out with Miami. They'll coach above the talent or they won't. New regimes with the Jets. New regime with the Patriots. And then there's the Bills, they've had a death grip on this division. And I'm sure, I think the Bills will probably win it again. And we'll see how these other teams build or don't around them. Or if the Bills are going to eventually not be the AFC's champions again. We'll find out. But those are the dynamics. That's what I think of these teams at this point entering the 2025 NFL Draft. All right, folks, thanks for being here. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.